Welcome to the ITFreeTraining video on Features on Demand. First introduced in Windows Server 2012, Features on Demand allows the install files normally kept on a Windows server to be relocated, saving file space on your server. If you have ever installed a role on a Windows server, you will notice that you were never prompted for the install DVD. This is because the install files are copied to the server when it is first installed. Features on Demand allows these install files to be removed from the server, thus reducing the amount of space required. These install files are also referred to as the payload. The payload not only takes up space on the server, but could also be used by an attacker. Even though the files are not in use on the server, they are still on the server, and potentially an attacker could make use of these to attack the system. If you decide to add a role or feature later on, you will need these install files. When Server Manager cannot find these files, Server Manager will prompt you for their location. These can be accessed from any location, for example, the DVD network share or Windows Update. Essentially, any file system that is accessible by Windows Server can be used to hold these files. I will now change to my Windows Server 2012 R2 install to look at how to remove these files and how to configure where Windows will look for these files when it cannot find them. To remove the unwanted payload information from this server, I will first right-click on the Start menu and select the command prompt. From the command prompt, I will enter in PowerShell to start PowerShell. To remove a feature or role from the operating system, this is done with the commandlet Uninstall-WIndowsFeature. In this case, I will remove the feature WINS. This is an old name resolution system that was used in the days before Windows started using DNS as the preferred name resolution system. I am 100% sure that I will not need this feature on my network. If I were to run this command, I would uninstall the feature if it were installed. It is not currently installed, so effectively this command will do nothing. To have it also remove the payload, I need to add the -remove parameter. This parameter will not only uninstall the feature if it is installed, it will also remove the payload from the Windows side-by-side store. The Windows side-by-side store is where Windows keeps install files. More on this in a moment. The command does not take too long to run. Now that it has completed, the next step is to remove the other features of the operating system that I will most likely never use. To get a full list of all the features, I will run the command get Windows feature. You will notice that there are a lot of features. If I scroll up through the features, there are pages of them, and to manually go through and remove them all would be quite a long process. If you have a lot of servers, this is impractical. If I go back down through the list, notice that some of them have crosses in the boxes, indicating that this feature is already installed. If you run the commandlet Uninstall-WIndowsFeature, this will not only remove the payload, but also the feature. This is not what you want. You want to remove the payload, but leave the feature installed. You also want a simple way of doing this and removing the features, as removing them one by one is not practical. Let's open Windows Explorer and go to the Windows directory. In the Windows directory is a folder called WinSXS. This is the Windows side-by-side store where all the install files are kept. If I open the properties for the folder, notice that this folder is about 5 GB in size. Rather than removing each feature one by one using PowerShell, I will save time and simply delete the whole folder from the system. Wait! This is a system directory. Although tempting and seemingly a quick fix, deleting a system directory is never a good idea. At first, it may seem like a good way to reclaim some space. However, if I open the properties of the C drive and compare the space used on the drive with the used space in the WinSXS directory, the whole drive is using about 8.5 gigabytes, while the WinSXS folder is using just over 5 gigabytes. If this directory were removed, it would appear that the whole operating system would be reduced to just over 3 gigabytes. But I know this is not the case. If I go into Windows Explorer and then go back to the Windows directory, and this time select all the files and folders in here except the folder WinSXS, notice what figure I get when I open the properties. About 5 gigabytes. So clearly the mathematics does not add up, and there is something special about the folder WinSXS, so let's have a closer look at it. Despite Features on Demand being a new feature in Windows Server 2012, the technology behind the side-by-side store was first introduced in Windows 98 2nd Edition. To consider why such a system is needed, consider what happens when some software is installed on the computer. It is not uncommon for software to access additional software installed on the operating system to expand the functionality of the software. For example, the software may access what is referred to as a dynamic link library, otherwise known as a DLL. The problem occurs when the system is upgraded. The DLL is upgraded when the system is upgraded. The new DLL has some bug fixes which you think would be good. However, third-party software installed on the system was originally written with those buggy DLLs and thus no longer works with the fixed DLL. Software that was coded around a DLL giving the wrong results can suddenly start crashing when it starts working the way it was supposed to, as the program is expecting different results. The results may be wrong, but they are what was coded for and expected. The problem gets even worse when you have an application that requires an update in order to work, but the update breaks another piece of software. Back in the 90s, this was referred to as DLL hell, where an administrator had to try and find the right set of updates that would make all the software on their system work. To get around this problem, the side-by-side store was created. When an upgrade or update is applied to the system, the previous version is also kept. The application is free to choose the latest version or a specific version if it wishes. This prevents applications from crashing due to software compatibility problems when upgrades are made. The truth be known, nowadays the side-by-side stores items as collections of files for a particular update or component rather than single files. But you get the idea. Different components and versions of these components can be stored in the side-by-side store and accessed as required. This helps keep your software running after an update. The side-by-side store also holds the install files for the payload. As shown, when a role or feature is installed, the required software is accessed by the operating system from the side-by-side store. This makes it easier for the administrator, as they do not have to locate DVDs to add components to the server. So the question arises, since these components are not in use, can they be removed? As we saw earlier, they can, and this will result in the side-by-side store getting smaller. Once the components are removed, if the administrator attempts to install these roles or features, Windows will require the missing media in order to do so. As long as the media is available from somewhere, the role or feature can be installed. The next question that arises is, when a component is installed in the operating system, can it be removed from the side-by-side store? The answer is no. To understand why, consider that the operating system has a copy of a file and the same file is in the side-by-side store. Even though in Windows Explorer you can see the file in two different locations and they appear to be different copies of the same file, the fact is there is only one copy of the file and both locations are accessing the same file. You can now understand why Windows Explorer was giving us those strange results when looking at the size of folders. When looking at the properties for the WinSXS folder and comparing it with other folders in the operating system, the results can be misleading, as a file may appear twice but only be found once on the hard disk. You should now understand that the only space saving that you can get in the side-by-side store is removing components that are not in use. If the operating system is using a component, the files for that component will be in use, and thus the hard disk space cannot be reclaimed. If the hard disk space were to be reclaimed, the component would no longer be available to the operating system. I will now go back to my Windows Server 2012 R2 computer and look at a quicker way to reduce unused components found in the side-by-side store. First of all, I will close these windows and go back to PowerShell. In order to get a list of components on the system, I will run the command get Windows feature. Rather than manually going through the list, I will use the pipe command to output the content of this command to another command. The command I will use is called whereObject. This is a commandlet that allows output to be examined and processed. In this case, I want to remove any features that are not currently installed. To do this, I will use the parameter filter script. This allows a script to be entered to process the output. This script used is encased in braces. The script is essentially saying process features found that are currently not installed. The whole line is not yet finished. However, I will run it now just to see what it does so far. You can see here that all the features have been listed. You will also notice in the list that none of the features that have currently been installed have been listed. Now that I have a list of unused features, I can use this list to remove these features. If I press the Up key, this will bring back the last command, and I can add another pipe, followed by Uninstall-WIndowsFeature. This is essentially transferring the output from the previous command into this command. Lastly, I will add -remove. Remember, this parameter is required to tell PowerShell to remove the unused files from the side-by-side store. This command does take a few minutes to run, so I will pause the video and return shortly. Once the command is complete, I will open the properties for the C drive to see how much space has been freed up. You can see that there is just over 7.5 gigabytes of free space. If I compare it with how much was there before, this is a savings of just under 1 gigabyte of space. You may not think that is a lot, but if you have 100 virtual servers, this is 100 gigabytes of hard disk space. On enterprise-grade solid-state drives with redundancy, this cost savings can be considerable. Now that the unused features have been removed from the side-by-side store, notice what happens when I go into Server Manager and attempt to add a role. In this case, I will add the DNS role and accept all the defaults in the Add Role wizard when prompted. When I get to the installation screen, notice that there is a warning message at the top of the screen. When I cursor over this warning, it is stating the install files are missing and will be downloaded from Windows Update. Otherwise, you can specify an alternate path if you wish. At the bottom of the screen, notice the option to specify an alternate source path. Once selected, a window will appear with quite a lot of information, but essentially there is only the one option at the bottom for the path to the install files. This can be a network location or the optical drive. In this case, I will make the files available on the network, so I will now change to my server NYDC1 to share the files on the network. To share the files, I first need to copy them. I have placed the Windows Server 2012 R2 install DVD in the DVD drive. I will now open Windows Explorer, navigate to the DVD drive, and then open the Sources directory. In the Sources directory, there is a folder called SXS, which is the side-by-side files required to install additional features in Windows Server 2012 R2. If I open the properties for the folder, notice that the folder is only 274 megabytes in size. so it is not a huge amount of data that is required to be on the network. I will now copy the SXS folder to the C drive. This folder will only work on Windows Server 2012 R2 installs, since it is from the Windows Server 2012 R2 DVD. If you have Windows Server 2012 servers on the network, you will need to copy the files from the Windows Server 2012 DVD. Once the folder has finished copying over, I will right-click on the folder and select the option Share With, and then select the option Specific People. From the File Sharing Wizard, I will add the Everyone group with read-only access. Since this share will only contain information from the DVD, I am not too worried if everyone on the network can read it. Once I press Share, the folder will be shared. I will now change back to my other server to complete the install of the additional role. Now that the network share has been set up, it is just a matter of entering in the location and completing the install. The process of installing will now proceed as normal. If you want to enter in the path for the share, you can configure this setting using Group Policy. To do this, I will right-click on the Start menu, select Run, and run gpedit.msc. The setting that I'm looking for is found under Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, System. Under System, the setting is called Specify Settings for Optional Component Installation and Component Repair. Once I open this setting, all I need to do is enter in the share folder containing the side-by-side files. You also have two additional options. If the folder is not available, the server will attempt to contact Windows Update to obtain updates. If you do not want this to happen, you can tick the first option and prevent the server from ever contacting Windows Update. The second option will bypass a WSUS server in favor of Windows Update for downloads. You would use this option when the WSUS server is on a less preferred link than Windows Update. Group Policy is now configured, so I can close it. This server will now update the payload automatically for the network when required. This covers it for Features on Demand. You will most likely use Features on Demand to save drive space, so let's see how much more space can be saved by removing the graphical interface and making sure the side-by-side store is as slim as possible. To do this, I will go into Server Manager and remove the features associated with the GUI interface and reboot the server into Server Core. In the Remove Roles and Features wizard, I will first untick DNS Server. This was installed earlier to demonstrate Features on Demand and is no longer required. On the next screen, I will remove the feature User Interface and Infrastructure. This will remove the graphical interface from Windows Server. It is just a matter of completing the wizard to remove the required features. In order to complete the process, I will now restart the server. This will remove the files from the operating system and uninstall the graphical interface. However, as we have learned, the payload will still be on the system. Once the server has restarted and I have logged in, I will need to remove the unused files from the side-by-side store. I will do this by running PowerShell, and then running the same command as I ran earlier in the video. There will not be much that can be removed from the side-by-side store since the last time that I ran the command. However, running the command again will make sure that I make the server as slim as possible. Once complete, I will run the fsutil command to find out how much drive space is in use at present. It is difficult to understand and compare it in this format, so I will view the results in a different way. Shown here is the amount of disk space used for each of the scenarios covered in this video. Your results may vary depending on a number of different factors, but this does give you an indication of the space saving you may get. Trimming the side-by-side store saved just under 1 GB of space. This does not sound like a lot, but it is actually 10% of the original install. When the GUI was also removed, this reduced the install by 1.8 gigabytes, making a total space savings of 3 gigabytes, or a savings of 30%. 30% is a decent amount of space, so if you have a lot of servers, this can quickly add up to a lot of space savings for your company, particularly if your company has a large number of servers using enterprise storage. Thanks for watching this video from ITFreeTraining. If you find that you make some real cost savings in your company using features on demand, let us know in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching, and see you next time.